Legend of Total War here, and today we're doing another Total War mod review. This time I'm covering the Call of Warhammer Beginning of the End Times mod for Medieval 2 Total War, which is sort of like the Total War Warhammer version, but for Medieval 2. So, I'll go through and I'll talk about some of the features and then let you guys know my thoughts. So just quickly in terms of the music, the game does have its own music aside from Medieval 2, Vanilla's music, however it is all copyrighted. I don't have the rights to showcase those tracks on this video, so I've just got Medieval 2 music playing in the background. However, what I will say is that I think that their selection of soundtracks for this mod is excellent. They've taken soundtracks from other Warhammer titles and from Two Steps from Hell, which I think that their music, the sort of epicness of it, I suppose, really fits the tone for this particular mod. So I think they've done an excellent job on that, although they probably didn't compose any of the music themselves. That's why I can't actually display any of it. Anyway, let's talk about the playable factions. You've got Bretonnia, Kislev, Reichland, Wissenland, Averland, Sturland, Middenland, Talabakland, Ostland, Ostermark, Hockland, Nordland, Dogs of War, minor factions, so that's kind of like the rebels, Chaos Undivided, Warriors of Khorne, Minions of Tzeentch, Children of Nurgle, Cultists of Slaanesh, Chaos Dwarfs, Skaven, Orcs and Goblins, Night Goblins, Ogre Kingdoms, so that's a faction. That, along with the Chaos Dwarfs, is a faction that isn't yet in Total War Warhammer, but will probably be introduced in Warhammer 3. You've got the Vampire Counts, Tomb Kings, Dark Elves, Wood Elves, High Elves, Lizardmen, and Dwarfs. So, some factions are split up into various different factions, for example, the Empire and Chaos. Other factions are just a unified race, like the Dark Elves and the Dwarfs. Even though the Dwarfs are spread out across the map a little bit, they're all just represented as one race. Now this is obviously because Medieval 2 has restrictions on how many factions can be playable, and even with all of what they've tried to do here, they've tried to implement even more factions using the minor factions, which I'll go into in a little bit. Anyway, let's jump into the campaign and I'll explain things a little bit further. Okay, so on the campaign map here, first thing I'll do is talk about what actual land mass you get to play on, how much of the Warhammer fantasy world is represented here. So we're in the northwest part of the map. This here is Nagaroth. So here you've got the Dark Elves, which is again a unified race. So you've got Malekith and Hellebron here. I believe there's a couple of other legendary lords that aren't actually in Total War Warhammer that are present here as well. There's a lot of generals that I'm not necessarily familiar with that will be represented on this campaign. I just can't reference them because I don't know everything about Warhammer Fantasy. Anyway, so down south here a bit more, you've got Ulthuan, which is run by Tyrion. You don't have the actual Vortex itself though. Now, down here you've got a minor faction, which has actually got Morathi here. Now, I believe that as the Dark Elves, you could actually come down here with a diplomat, bribe this settlement, and gain Morathi that way. At first, because I've done a Dark Elf campaign, and I didn't understand where Morathi was, and I didn't realize I'd conquered and killed her. I did it accidentally, but you should be able to actually come down here and bribe them. So if you wanted to get this, legendary lord, you could do so that way. But I think she's just the same as any other lord in terms of the game. Anyway, going further down south, you got Hexawaddle, so Mazdamundi's there, and the rest of the Lizardmen is just all one faction. I don't think Krokgar is in this, although I'm not entirely sure. Coming down a bit further south into Lustria, you got some minor Skaven factions down here. And you've got the Vampire Coast, so you've got Luther Harkon down here. If you play as the Vampire Coast, you can get over here and bribe that, you can have Luther Harkon join you. Coming down even further south, you've got Araby. Now, the way the minor factions work on this, provided you're not actually playing as them, they do have something of a script that I think functions quite well. So, rather than have their own faction, they've got various scripts that allow them to actually recruit and move their armies around so that they actually organize themselves properly. Now, when I first played as the Dark Elves, I came down here just not expecting to have any sort of fight. I was like, oh yeah, this is all rebel territory, I'll just go and take it. Sort of like what you would do in Medieval 2. But I remember coming down here and making a beeline for this settlement here, and I believe this army intercepted me and actually repelled me, and it really impressed me how the rebel AI actually functioned. Now, unlike with EB2 as an example, I believe that if you wipe out a rebel army, it doesn't just spawn back 1 or 2 turns later. The rebel army has to actually be recruited, so it does in some small way represent a faction. Now, it's not the only one that does that. I believe Tilia, Estalia, and there's various other ones will also perform similar sorts of tasks that are scripted. Now, that's the kind of scripting that I can certainly get behind. Anyway, obviously, you know, to try to deal with the limitations in Medieval 2. Then further east here, you've got Khemri, which is run by Cetra. Going up further north into the Badlands, you've got the Greenskins, which are a little bit all over the place, just a little bit. That's run by Grimgor Ironhide. He's the faction leader. Then you've got the Dogs of War, which is sort of like border princes, but they do have their own roster. They're not just a Empire clone like they are in Total War Warhammer. That being said, currently border princes aren't playable without mods. Then you've got Skaven over here. Skaven have a few settlements that are sort of spread out. They've got Skaven Blight and these 2 settlements over here. I think they might have some more elsewhere, but I'm not entirely sure. Then you've got, you know, Estalia over here. Again, it's another faction run by Scripps. Various Bretonian, Beastmen, and Vampire account factions. So over here you've got the Red Duke. Again, another faction that you could, if you wanted to, as the Vampire accounts, come over here and bribe to gain control of, you know, this legendary lord. Then you got Bretonia up here, run by Lewin Leoncoeur. I don't think that Alberic the Bordelot and the Fey Enchantress is in this. I'm not entirely sure though. I haven't actually played as Bretonia. Then you've got the various Empire factions and some Rebel factions in between. You got Marienburg up here, run by, I think it's run by a script, but I'm again not entirely sure. And up here we've got Chaos Undivided. Now, Chaos Undivided is an interesting faction in this. So there's 5 Chaos factions, but Chaos Undivided is kind of like the mega faction. They've got they represent Norsca as well as all other Chaos factions. So they've got access to pretty much the largest roster of troops in the game. So you'll basically never be short for manpower playing as these guys. Also, in terms of legendary lords, you've got Throg, you got Wulfric the Wanderer here, and I believe Archaon's sitting in this settlement. Now, funny thing about most of the factions in this game is that if you kill any particular legendary lord, they're actually dead. So you can kill Archaon in battle and he doesn't come back. The only exception to this rule is actually the Wood Elves, which I missed down here. Wood Elves here in Alpha Lauren. I believe if you kill Orion, he keeps coming back over and over again. In order to wipe him out, you actually have to kill. You have to capture all of his territory, which, you know, isn't that much. But I did find that it's a pretty strong faction. Not the strongest. Definitely the Chaos Undivided's got to be the strongest, I found. Anyway, so there's Norsca. Going up further north, you've got the various separate Chaos factions. So they all have a unique flavor to them. They're not all just carbon copies of each other. You've got the Slaanesh faction. So Sigvald the Magnificent is in charge of that, I think. And the Slaaneshi faction is kind of like, it uses a lot of, I guess, sexualized troops. It's got demonettes make a very large portion of the army. They don't necessarily have a lot of defense, and but they're more about, I guess, high attack and very high speed. Then you've got Nurgle over here. I'm not familiar with too many of the legendary lords associated with Nurgle, but the way their faction's roster is represented, they're really slow and incredibly tanky. Most of their units just have to take an absolute beating before they'll even think about dying. Then you've got Sinch over here, and Sinch is very much focused on magic, so he'll have things like the Flamers of Sinch, which are sort of like horse archer demon flamethrower units. Followers of Sinch have a lot of really unique units. And then you've got Blood for the Blood God, you've got the Keeper Skulls over here, the followers of Khorne. Now, Khorne's faction's exactly what you'd expect. It's all melee troops, and they've got a pretty decent array of demon available as well. So you've got, I believe, Bloodletters. I think they're available in the game. Is it Bloodletters or... I can't remember. But anyway, they've definitely got demons and very high-powered, high melee, sort of like Berserker infantry and cavalry. So they're not ranged at all. They've got like no ranged units, but they're very heavily focused on melee. And when it comes to all four specialties here, I believe that Chaos Undivided can basically recruit from all four of them, in addition to, for example, Beastmen troops, which Beastmen doesn't have a faction in this. Beastmen are all over the place in here, so they're a playable faction if you play as them as sort of as the as Chaos Undivided or as minor country. So I think down here somewhere there's a Beastmen army. I'm not entirely sure. Might be mistaken. Doesn't matter. Then over here we've got the Chaos Dwarfs, again a faction that we'll hopefully see in Warhammer 3. Very different to the regular Dwarfs. Not too familiar with them, but they've got some really good artillery. And we've got Kislev. Now Kislev again is not a carbon copy of the Empire. They've got their own unique roster. I did a Let's Play of them on Twitch, and they've got a really cool playstyle. I actually quite enjoyed playing as Kislev. We've got the Night Goblins over here, and then there's the Dwarfs. So we got Karak Kedrin there, which I believe Ungrim, Iron Fist is there. And you've got Karazak Karak, which I think Thorgrim's there, not entirely sure. And they've got a few settlements up this way. Then you got the Vampire Counts over here at the Bloodkeep, and of course in Sylvania, which of course is run by Manfred von Garstein. Now, I believe... I'm not certain on this, so don't quote me on it. I believe that the Vampire Counts are the only faction in this that can actually be turned into a horde, meaning that if you take out all their settlements but don't kill all their lords, that they'll actually turn into a horde and roam the map that way. Some of the other races might do that as well, but I'm not certain on that. I've never actually conquered the map. It takes a long time to do it. And then finally we've got the Ogre Kingdoms down here. So their big thing is that they've probably got the best melee troops in the game. Or best individual fighters. Some of the Ogre troops are just really, really strong, but they're also very expensive, so their manpower is extremely low and their finances are really bad, as an example for a faction. So overall, what do I think of Call of Warhammer Beginning of the End Times? This is honestly one of my favorite mods, and to a large degree I think that they've done a lot of things better in this mod than what Total War Warhammer has done. Obviously, things like graphics and the way the lords are customized in Total War Warhammer are far superior than what they're capable of doing in this. Same thing with like beasts and magic. But in terms of the campaign aspect, you know, on the actual campaign map, you know, Medieval 2 in many ways is superior to Warhammer 2 in some ways. In that, you know, the amount of customization you can have with your cities, you know, being able to split your armies up, you know, not being stuck together in the way that they introduced with Rome 2 is really superior. The economies is wildly different between different factions. So, for example, the Empire, if you build up your settlements, they can end up making a hell of a lot of money, and you can have settlements that can house a lot of people. Whereas, for example, the Dark Elves, they don't have much population in their settlements, so it's very hard to grow these regions, but they do have some very excellent troops. Then you've got like the Greenskins down here, which again can recruit a lot of high tier units from low tier settlements, but are almost incapable of making, you know, money through their buildings. They just don't have any money making buildings, things of that sort. So it does vary quite wildly between the factions, and I think represents each faction pretty lore-wise, pretty friendly. One thing as well that I want to point out is that merchants in this game are actually valuable. It's a bit of a meme on my channel that I'm basically always shitting on merchants, and that's because in Medieval 2 they're not particularly valuable. It really just comes down to personal preferences or whether or not you even get to the late campaign. But in Call of Warhammer Beginning of the End Times, the merchants are quite valuable for two reasons. The trade values of specific resources is very much increased, for merchants, so even a low-level merchant could end up making hundreds of gold per turn, depending on the resource that they're on. But also, the merchants live a long time, because the time scale on this is, I think, 10 turns per year. And since there's 359 turns to play to get your victory conditions, that's 36 years. So if you recruit someone at level 30, they're probably still going to be alive at level 6 at age of 69 or whatever, because the age of old age in this is much increased. Most people aren't going to die of old age throughout this campaign. They're probably going to die throughout the campaign because it's just full of death and destruction and war. It's non-stop. But they don't necessarily die of old age. Now, in terms of the pacing of the campaign, I think the pacing is actually quite excellent. Now, I was very critical of EB2 about the slow-paced campaign. Now, the thing is with this particular campaign here, is that it does take you a long time to go through it. You won't be able to get to victory conditions in like a couple of hours. You won't just be able to blitz the map. And it's not because of public order restrictions, having to constantly build up your government and that kind of stuff like you do in EB2, as an example. It's purely because the AI puts up a pretty decent fight. Now, although, of course, you will be able to outsmart the AI, you will be able to beat them in most battles. And the AI does get a bunch of cheats so they can recruit more units and have more money, that kind of stuff. But overall, the pacing, although the game takes a long time to finish, the pacing doesn't feel deliberately slow. The battles seem to be reasonably paced. The cavalry charges seem to be pretty decent, as long as you get a good one in. You know, it seems to be pretty decent. The beasts and monsters in the game do seem to be actually quite overpowered in some cases, but really well represented. The missile units, seem to have sufficient ammunition to be able to do damage. Some of them are, very much overpowered as well. There's a lot of units in this that, given certain situations, absolutely dominate. And to be honest, that sort of chaotic way in which, one specific unit could turn the tide on a battle, I really love about this mod. Because it makes me care about these particular units. They're not all just, killing each other 1-for-1 ratio or taking forever to kill each other. There's a lot of tactics involved in this, and you got to think about what units you want to use. And of course, you've got the recruitment pool, so you can't just spam them as well. So, and there's the specialties of each race is really empowered in this. Using the example of the Empire has got some of the best artillery in the game. Using the mortars to bombard a settlement before making the assault is something that other races are simply not able to do. Races like Chaos, but what they're able to do is use massive manpower to just overwhelm a settlement. So it doesn't matter if they take casualties. So all of this culminates in a very flavorsome campaign where every single faction is different, to some degree, except for like all the Empire factions. They're more or less, they've got some differences between them, but they are the most similar between them all. But I've played as Reichland, I've played as Kislev, I've played as the Dark Elves, and I've played as Chaos. And each campaign I got a different experience out of, and I thoroughly enjoy this mod. Anyway, let's now jump into a battle, and I'll showcase a little bit of the pacing. Okay, so I've loaded up one of my old save files, and I found a situation here. I'll take one of my Dark Elf armies and go up against this Vampire counter army here. The battlefield and will be awash looks like I've got a massive advantage, but it doesn't matter. We're just showing the pace, so let's use this battle as an example.
Great will be the slaughter!
So yeah, I've just got the Warhammer 2 soundtrack for the Dark Elves on this at the moment, because like I said, I can't use the in-game sound. It would just get copyright claimed to shit. Anyway, so this is my army roster at the moment. I've got some Shades, Assassins, Dark Shards. I've got a lot of Dark Shards. We've got a Cauldron of Blood over here. We've got some Witch Elves of Cain. And some Black Ark Corsairs and Dread Spears. I've also got Dark Riders, so they've got the repeater crossbows, and I've got 2 generals on Veteran Cold Riders. You won't believe just how bloody good these units are, from my memory. Anyway, we'll just play through the battle, and you'll get an idea of the pacing. Now, in terms of the Vampire Count army, they've got a mix of, the Vampires can actually hire undead units, and they can actually hire some Empire units, because they sort of use them as slaves. So they've actually got some Empire Spearmen and things like that. Now, all undead units have no morale in this, so you actually have to fight them to the death. They cannot break, and there's no crumbling mechanic in this. But they're Empire slaves. You can you can break them. But, you know, some of their units like zombies are so crap that, you know, you don't even have to really worry about them. But they do have some really good units, so let's see how we're going to do it. What I'm going to do firstly, of course, use the horse archers here to shred them, because they've got like no missile units. While they get close, we'll have our missile units rip them to shreds. The great thing about the dark shards, because they're using repeated crossbows, they rip through their ammunition really quickly. So even if they come at us pretty quickly, we should be able to rip them to shreds. Anyway, let's do this. So what I want him to do is take out these black knights over here. So they've got some dire wolves. That's the Graveguard bodyguard. I think they've done an excellent job with how everything looks as well, considering, you know, it is medieval too. The models look amazing. Not that I really care that much about that kind of stuff, but I'm sure a lot of other people do. And unlike in Warhammer 2, cavalry is actually useful in Call of Warhammer. Very, very useful. So while that's going on, dark shards, like I said, they rip through their ammunition pretty damn quickly because of these repeated crossbows. Their reload animation is really short, so you can see they're just ripping right through them. Now that's not to say that the dark elves are overpowered. They're not necessarily, because it takes a long time to recruit an army like this. That's the thing about the dark elves. Their troops are very, very strong, but they can't spam armies. Like the vampire cows can raise another army like this really quickly. So there's different strengths to different armies. So I've already killed one of their generals. I'm not sure if it's the right one though. Some blood dragon knights over there. And they've taken voice acting from various other Warhammer games. I think it was like some online game. I'm not sure it was. Most of the things come from that, which, you know, some really good voice acting in there. Now this is on very hard difficulty as well, on both campaign and on battle. And you can see that the pacing's pretty good. Like, it's slower than vanilla, but not so slow that this is going to take half an hour. It certainly helps that these dark shards just basically rip through things like butter. But the melee's not that slow either. I think the main thing with Call of Warhammer Beginning of the End Times is that it actually utilizes everything that the engine has to offer. It doesn't remove any features. There's crusade mechanics. I didn't mention it before, but the orcs can use wars as like a crusade, and same with chaos. Chaos can do a chaos invasion. So that's their crusade mechanic. So that was the actual commander there. Yeah, like they rip through things and they've got good armor piercing and everything, but they don't have a lot of ammo. but they're decent melee fighters as well. So I'm talking about the Dark Shards. Oh, I lost a general. Oh, did my general die? I think I may have gotten him killed. No, that looks like my general there. Maybe it was this guy here. Oh well. I don't know. Maybe my general did get killed. Usually the generals do have more hit points. They're usually the last ones to die in a unit, but it's not unheard of for them to be the first one. There we go. And so that didn't take us too long, and that was a good battle. I mean, obviously I had the advantage right from the get-go, but that gives you an idea of the pacing. I think the pacing is just fine in Call of Warhammer Beginning of the End Times. Okay, so just some final notes. In terms of the stability, obviously you will get some crashes every now and again. Medieval 2 does have a memory leak issue, so remember to save every now and again, and maybe after every hour, just get out of the game and get back into it. That'll just minimize your crashes. It's the same with really any Medieval 2 mod. So overall, what do I think of the mod? Well, obviously I think it's pretty shit. 1 out of 10. Would not play again. No, I'm just kidding. I love this mod. I would play it more often if I could. I just usually short on time. If I had to give it a rating out of 10, I'd give it probably 9.5 out of 10. The things that I dislike most about this mod, I guess, if I was to give it any criticisms, that I don't like garrison scripts, and there are a few garrison scripts, as in if you besiege an important settlement that doesn't have a large garrison, the AI will just spawn a full stack in there. That it can be quite irritating. Apart from that, though, I think they've done an amazing job with this mod, and if you like the Warhammer Fantasy universe, I would highly recommend downloading this mod and sinking a couple of 100 hours into it. I certainly want to play this mod more often. Anyway, that's the end of this mod review. Let me know what mod you want me to cover next, and I'll see you next time, fuckers. Also, there'll be a link in the description for the to download this mod.